Right, well, welcome, guys. We are here on the beautiful Massey Shaw boat. We are docked up in Canary Wharf. I'm here with Dave, who's part of the Partnership Trust. We are super excited to give you a walking tour of the Massey Shaw boat, and we will talk you through the history of the boat and why it is such a special piece of World War II and many different parts of British history. But first and foremost, I'll let Dave do a quick introduction.
Hi, my name's Dave Rogers. I'm currently the CEO of the Massey Shaw Education Trust, and we look after the fireboat Massey Shaw. We've been in existence as a trust since 1982, and the boat itself heralds from the 1930s. In fact, she was built in 1935 as a purpose-built fireboat for the London Fire Brigade. And within a very short space of time, she was involved in a number of large incidents on the Thames. But certainly her sort of crowning glory that we're talking about today is her involvement in the Dunkirk evacuation, which happened in May/June 1940, in which this boat was sent across from Ramsgate over to the beaches of Dunkirk and managed to save over 600 troops off the beaches and brought another 110 back to the UK. So the vessel itself, obviously, when it returned from Dunkirk, unlike some of the other little ships who were involved, passed back to their owners, her owners were the London Fire Brigade. And so immediately on her return, she was involved in the London Blitz, which she was, as a fireboat, very active, and particularly in 1940, at the end of that period, when she was involved with saving St Paul's by sitting in the middle of the river, producing large amounts of water in order for the firefighters at the time to actually get that supply and to stop the most iconic place, excuse me, of St Paul's being lost. So the boat itself has had a very long life. She was 36 years as a fireboat on the river. And then since then, the society was formed in the 80s to actually look after her, because by that time she was in quite poor condition and she needed some funds, some TLC. And it was an important part for the British Fire Service that this boat was retained. And here we are today. Fortunately, the Trust has been successful in restoring the vessel, and we're in part of that process now. And one of the big things we're looking for is that the sale of the watches will help us to move the whole project forward, because we have some major engineering work that needs doing on our engines, and we're hoping to go back in 2025 with the Dunkirk little ships to the next anniversary return. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we are very, very keen to make that effort, because the vessel itself has a totally unique history, and we'd like to obviously keep that going for many years to come.
Absolutely, and you can understand just by how much history there is why this boat is so special, and why we're looking to produce a Dunkirk edition watch which will actually house pieces of this beautiful boat that played a pivotal part of history. And of course, anyone who purchases one of the watches as well will have their actual name engraved onto a plaque, which will be carried on the boat for that Channel crossing in 2025. So you too will become a part of really Dunkirk and World War II history, which is pretty magnificent. So let's get moving. It's a cold January's day, so I think we need to keep moving on the boat. So let's do a tour and explain to all of the viewers here exactly the different elements of the Massey Shaw.
Okay, so where we're starting from now is an important area, because certainly for the troops that were being rescued at Dunkirk, where we are now is the hose area, the hose room, where all the boat's hose was procured from. So the boat itself would carry normally 1.5 miles of hose,
Wow.
which is a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
But the reason for that was that the boats themselves would spend a great deal of their time moored up in midstream on the Thames or a canal, wherever they were being used, or in a dock, in fact. And they had to get the water. They could project the water from the boat, which we'll talk about in a few minutes' time. But one of the key parts was to get hose literally from this boat to the shore, and then the boat could start pumping. So that 1.5 mile hose was often, all of it was being used throughout this period. So below where we're standing now is the hose room. But it was also used at Dunkirk as the area for a number of the troops to actually lie down, get some rest, and to get the journey back to the UK, hopefully all in one piece, which in this case the boat was successful. So lots of the stories that we've had from individuals who've been rescued by the boat was we found they didn't know they were being rescued by a fireboat until they actually were given either a mug of tea or something and realised this was a fireboat.
Wow.
And they were shown into a hose room in order to get some respite. So all they would do was basically move some of the hose around, make a space. They were given some basic blankets and some covering, and that's where they spent their time. So a lot of them just fell asleep because a lot of them had been waiting 3 or 4 days for rescue. They were tired, they were dehydrated, and they needed some sort of basic comforts.
Yeah.
And the hose room, very basic though it is, was the place to be. So that's literally underneath our feet now.
Okay. And it's this panel which is the accessible point into the hose room.
It is.
Okay.
If you look,
Yeah,
we can
let's.
bring this up
If that's
and we can
okay,
have a
let's have a
little
look. I'm sure the viewers would want to have a look inside.
It's better because you can see the hose room.
Yeah, sure. Oh wow. Okay.
So, what we're looking at now is right below our feet, are where the hose is stored. So they were being normally 50 or 100 feet lengths,
Okay.
and the top of the hose racks themselves, all the hose was put down onto the floor, and that was taken to home.
Yeah.
They weren't worried about that. Most of them just fell asleep and said, you know, the next time they woke up, they were in Ramsgate,
Yeah.
which
Wow.
was
Okay.
was a fantastic achievement.
Yeah. What a view to wake up to after everything that they've gone through.
Exactly so, and bearing in mind that lots of those people were suffering from various illnesses, etc., mainly because of the hardships they'd suffered, both getting to Dunkirk and being on the beaches
Yeah.
when they were strafed, etc.
Okay.
But it's also an important part for the boat itself. And why did it go to Dunkirk was the fact that it's virtually a flat bottom boat,
Yeah.
and that's how it was designed, so it could work on the Thames. But that came in very handy when they were going to Dunkirk, because they could get in really close to the beaches, they could get the troops on without too many difficulties,
Yeah.
and so it became a natural place. So they would take the troops in small groups, up to 50 or 60 at a time, to the larger boats, and then they would decant them to there. But once they'd done that, then they would take people back in groups, normally about 50, 55 people, onto the boat, and then they would take them back on to Ramsgate.
Gotcha.
So they had that sort of ferrying role, but also an important role in getting people back themselves.
Okay.
They did 3 trips, Dave, didn't they?
That's right. They had 3 trips in all,
Yeah.
and that was the important thing and that's why in the Sir Bertram Ramsay, who was in charge of the actual expedition. He wrote the fact that the Massey Shaw was a well-found craft, and out of all the little ships, it was the one that got the most mentions. So that's why, as a vessel, which wasn't designed to go across the channel, it did so well, and why we're able to keep it with us today.
Okay.
Well, it actually went over for firefighting initially, that was the thinking. But when they got over there, they were asked by the Admiralty, the London Fire Brigade were asked by the Admiralty to provide a fireboat. But when they got over there, of course, Dunkirk was in flames, you know, the oil tanks, the whole thing, and it was just beyond firefighting. So they just joined the other little ships and took part in the evacuation proper. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And a question that I had as well, which I'm sure the viewers will want to know more about, is the Massey Shaw was a living person.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be useful, I think, for the viewers to know a little bit about the Massey Shaw, and I believe that we'll be able to share illustrations of what that gentleman actually looked like too.
Got pictures of him in the cruise.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah, he's classed by the British Fire Service and most people as being one of the founding fathers of the actual fire service in this country. So Captain Sir Eyre Massey Shaw, given his full title, was born in Ireland. Basically went up to Belfast and became a chief officer of a very small fire brigade. He was only in his 30s when he actually answered an interview, a questionnaire stroke interview, came to London when the London fire officer was killed, and that was at Tooley Street. So he then managed to, I think, use some of his Irish charm to get this peach of a job really,
Okay.
because he'd got quite a large family. He needed something to keep him going, but he was very keen to bring in some modern innovations. And one of the things that he was very keen on was fireboats. He'd seen them. He'd had some basic background information when he went to America in his youth, and seen boats in action. And particularly, he was concerned the fact that the fire cover in London was quite poor, particularly with the large number of warehouses, etc., on the river. So having fireboats which could produce large amounts of water, could actually assist when the water was low, became one of the features of certainly his period of time, his 30 years in charge of the fire brigade.
That was 1861.
Yes.
He served from 1861 to 1890, yeah? And on his last day he was knighted by Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, his involvement with the royal family is also of interest, because he went to places like Windsor Castle, etc., and gave advice to the Queen and her husband about fire precautions, which was then taken up by a number of people throughout the country, particularly his involvement with incidents that happened with theatres.
Okay.
Because one of the things, a part of the Victorian life which he moved into, was this upper echelon where people went to the theatre on a regular basis, but unfortunately the fire precautions there were very poor.
Okay.
They didn't have the big curtain that comes down now that blocks the audience from the actual participants in the plays, etc. And he brought about those regulations plus a number of others with
Wow.
really good equipment for the firemen of the period. He changed the whole outfit. That's where we get our brass and silver fire helmets from, and also for the guys themselves, the kit and how the responsibility they had. They were allowed to stay on fire stations. Their families were looked after, and so it was a whole new organisation that he brought about in those 30 years. And for the boat to be named after him, the two link in together really well, because this has got its own unique history, and so the person that they were named after as well.
The thing with Massey Shaw's period was, of course, London was expanding rapidly during that sort of 1860s onwards, and so of course the brigade had to expand with it. So I think they went from something like 17 or 19 stations to about 90 by the Edwardian period.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a massive expansion as well. Yeah.
So he really played an instrumental role. Like, he's a key figure in the British Fire Service history. I think I actually saw as well in the Fire Service College that a street is named after him. The Massey Shaw Avenue, So obviously, there's lots of homage throughout Britain paying respects to him.
In the fire service world, he is a big name. Yeah,
Wow.
He's well regarded.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we've talked about the fire hose room. Should we move on to what would you call the navigation area? Or
This is called the Wheelhouse.
okay, let's take a look.
Let's
Yeah.
have a look. Yeah, come in. So,
We need to talk about those dials because I recognise those in the watch as well. So
that's right. So basically where we are now is in the Wheelhouse, which is where the boat's controlled from. So what we have now is a roof over the top of the Wheelhouse, which was put on in the late 1940s. Before that, the whole of this area was open. So the wheel here and the telegraphs, which operate both the fire pumps and the engines, all of that would be totally exposed. But the roof was put on in the late 40s to give some protection to the guys at the helm. But certainly when they went to Dunkirk, this was all open. So if you can imagine going into a war zone, completely open to the elements, and also
just with the wheel, basically.
just with the wheel. And the guy who was actually in charge on the 3 trips that we've mentioned was a guy called Sub Officer Aubrey John May.
Okay.
And he was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his efforts, because he basically championed the boat, kept it safe, and managed to get the boat and all of its passengers, etc., backwards and forwards across the channel without any incident, which is an amazing achievement, because a couple of times the engines failed. They had difficulties getting people on board because of the tides, but he managed to champion that, and went on later on in his career to be awarded further medals for gallantry in other parts of the world, in Egypt.
Wow.
So a really interesting character. But basically he would be in charge, and then you'd have a second person who would be actually involved in running the telegraphs. So the telegraphs themselves on the the first side that we're looking at here, these run the fire pumps.
Okay.
So we have two main engines and 2 fire pumps, and they actually the controls are operated on here. And if you can hear the ringing of the bells,
You can, yeah.
yeah.
Amazing.
So ringing the bell themselves would indicate to the people in the engine room that they wanted to use the fire pumps.
Gotcha.
And then they would ring that back to confirm that they'd got that instruction.
Okay.
And the same thing happens here for the main engines. You can hear that. And they are in different tones,
Yeah.
so that people would know which engine they were talking about. And
2 engines and 2 pumps.
yes, so we could run both engines and both pumps, or we can move the boat along utilising one of the engines and put the other one into a pumping mode.
Gotcha.
So we can actually move the boat along and pump at the same time.
Okay.
So it's quite a unique system. It's also quite unique to have on the Thames now, or any river, telegraph controlled vessels.
Sure.
Important to remember is that when we go into the engine room later on, that the guys in the engine room actually can't see anything apart from out of the windows, so they're really listening to these
All
telegraphs.
the senses they have to be in tune with.
And
yeah.
the person who's actually running the boat, the
Wow.
skipper, has to realise that when they give a command, it may take a moment or two for a response.
Wow.
Which means by now, if the boat's at full speed, they could be moving into a dangerous area. So they have to sort of think ahead, saying, right, I'm going to go forward, I'm going to go back one side or another,
Okay.
and or pump.
Yeah.
And to pump, there's a series of 6 valves to undo. So that takes, unlike a modern thing where they will press a button,
Yeah.
which the modern fireboats have, this one physically someone has to wind out all the valves
Okay.
and then get the water and then confirm that.
Wow.
So that takes some time.
Yeah. And some muscle as well.
Exactly so. And obviously the reverse of that is when they want to stop. They've
Mm.
got to then go through that whole process to
Of
shut
course.
the water coming through.
Wow.
So it's all time consuming.
And Dave, let's just take a closer look at this as well, because this here obviously is going to stand out a lot to our customers, because we've taken a lot of inspiration from the actual dial here, which is going to be used on the watch face itself. So when you guys are looking at the actual Massey Shaw Dunkirk watch, that will stand out instantaneously to you, because that was heavily a piece of inspiration for us.
And it's a key factor in, obviously, for both the engines and for the fire pumps,
Yeah.
that these work properly. So in our recent restoration, which happened thanks to the lottery, National Lottery Fund, we spent a great deal of time getting the telegraph to work properly, because they run on a chain system, and when we before we had the restoration, a lot of the work was needed to be done because the chains were slack, bits had broken, and it wasn't operating particularly well.
Okay.
We're very fortunate now that it does work.
Amazing.
But it gives you an idea that, unlike a modern responsive piece, which will happen immediately,
Yeah.
we're relying on people
Of course.
to do that. And so if they have a bad day, everyone has a bad day.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
So
teamwork is
It's
important.
teamwork is important,
Yeah,
and
okay.
to be able to do that.
Sure.
The other thing to note is that this boat is still effectively fully not operational, but in full working order, subject, of course, to our engine problem at the moment.
Yeah.
But otherwise, everything works on here. In theory, we could go to a fire.
Wow.
In theory, the brigade wouldn't want us, but So and also all the fittings. It was about 85% original. I mean, this had a 1.2 million refit with Heritage Lottery Fund money.
Yeah.
What was that, about 10 years ago, Dave, maybe a bit more. As I say, it came back almost like a new fireboat, but in fact 85% of the fittings are original.
Wow.
Obviously we had to have modern electrical systems and so forth, and other requirements, but otherwise it's 85% original, as I say. But everything works. That's the thing. We can get a monitor working, we get a jet working, yeah.
It's quite unbelievable, actually, isn't it? Really, for how old the history is.
It's not like a sort of a museum piece, that doesn't do anything anymore.
It's operational.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Superb.
absolutely.
Should we move on to the onto the upper deck now, gentlemen?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So moving out from the wheelhouse, we come to the sort of the feature that most people recognise when they talk about Massey Shaw, and that's the monitor. Now the Monitor itself, we're not sure where the name came from, but it appeared in a Merryweather's, who make a lot of used to make a lot of fire equipment, catalogue as a Monitor, and that's what we know it is today. A water jet which is powered by our two main engines, so we can put in quite a large amount of water. So the idea of why would we have a fireboat, this particular fireboat was able to produce 3,000 gallons of water a minute.
What?
Which is an incredible amount of water, and even today we can produce near to that capacity. So it's and the idea was that in the 1930s, when this was produced, was to be able to assist with fighting warehouses, large warehouse fires, which needed lots of water. So the boat itself could pump either via the Monitor, which would direct a jet of water onto large warehouses, and we've got pictures and things of the first fire that it went to, which is Colonial Wharf in 1935, within 6 months of being on the water, and it's credited with saving over £2 million worth of stock. Now,
Wow.
if you rate that up to what happened in 1930s, it's a phenomenal amount of money was saved. But
Wow.
what they managed to do was to make a fire break with the Monitor and stop the fire from spreading into a number of other warehouses, which they had millions of pounds worth in current terms of stock, etc., that was could have been lost.
Wow.
So the boat, if you recommend, and we haven't mentioned, I mean, in 1935, this boat cost £18,000.
Okay.
So in that first fire, it
It
paid
made
for
up,
itself
yeah, very
very,
much
very
so.
quickly.
Yeah.
And since then, obviously, in its time, that £18,000 was very well spent,
Yeah.
apart from the Dunkirk trip. But for firefighting in general, people knew that when Massey Shaw, the fireboat, would arrive, that they could get water, and lots of it. And that was the key point, particularly later on during the Blitz, when water was a premium. This could sit in the Thames and could actually pump water as it did for days on end.
Yeah.
They would swap the crews round, fuel it up, and she would just pump and pump and pump.
Wow.
We tried some years ago to work out how many trillions of gallons of water this boat's pumped in its lifetime, and it would be off the chart.
I bet.
Because even now, with as a small group, we do pumping as part of our displays.
Yeah.
And to have this going, people are just astounded by what can be done on a
Yeah.
boat of this age. But she was the biggest fireboat that we've had on the Thames, and still remains so, with pumping capacity.
Wow.
So the Monitor itself is made of brass and copper. It's on basically a balance device at the end. Normally 2 people operate it,
Okay.
because it is quite heavy, and with the jet. So the Monitor itself is made of brass and copper, and as you can see, takes a lot of cleaning. It does seem to sort of people gravitate to it, but we say every time you touch it, you have to clean it. So I think that's a good warning point, because it does take a lot of work.
I just touched it earlier, so am I going to have to pay my dues here? Yeah.
I think you may have to do that.
Okay.
The thing itself is that we were very pleased that when the boat came out of service, the Monitor and various other items, which could have disappeared because it's scrap value alone, it's quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
Fortunately, people managed to squirrel it away and to keep hold of it, because it is a totally unique piece. When we look at the actual end of the Monitor itself, there are various sizes of nozzle or jet that we use. This is the smallest one, and it can go up to 6-inch wide at the end. This is currently at 2-inch wide, and it gives a nice throw of water. So we try and keep it to the smaller one, but we have other Monitors as well. So that was once again another feature that was saved, because to actually try and replace those, or to try and get other bits made, is quite an expensive job. So
Yeah,
we're
I'm
pleased
sure.
that all of that was kept.
It's a beautiful, I mean, it's iconic to the boat itself, isn't it? When you think of the Massey Shaw and you see the images, this is such an instrumental part. And you mentioned earlier as well about how Massey Shaw pumped water from the Thames to St Paul's Cathedral to actually help save what is my favourite building in London during the Blitz. And there's a statue actually in front of St Paul's of firefighters pointing up to the building. Do you want to talk a bit about the role that she played in saving what is an iconic building on the London skyline?
Well, one of the big things that happened, obviously, in the raid at the end of December in 1940 was the actual damage that was being caused. Lots of incendiary bombs were being dropped, particularly around St Paul's itself. The thing that people need to remember is that if you go into St Paul's today, there's a wooden shell inside the actual dome, and it's a lead roof. So all of that, obviously, if that had caught light with the incendiaries, the building could have been lost. And the message was sent from Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, to the fire brigade that that the actual building, St Paul's, should be saved at all costs. So lots of resources were diverted from other fires to protect that area. And one of the big things was that the night of that raid, the Germans had obviously looked at their tide tables and realised that the water level was going to be at one of its lowest levels, and therefore getting water from the Thames, which is the natural thing that they would have done, was going to be difficult. So having a fireboat that could actually suck up as much of the water as possible and then take it to the shore, and the water was then pumped into dams, and that was then fed out to the trailer pumps and the fire engines of the period to actually get a curtain of water around St Paul's in order for the building to be saved. And that's what she did. So, but the problem was, of course, as a fireboat, she's a sitting duck. So in order to keep things going, while the strafing was going on, bombs happening, and there's a lot of debris in the water as well. People forget the fact that there were been incidents further upriver, so you get lots of trees, parts of buildings, and also things like molasses and sugar and various other things, which were basically alight. And obviously that was flowing down the river, and the boat was having to sit there. So it put itself and the crews in danger.
Sure.
But fortunately, it worked out well, and the boat itself managed to keep the water supply going, and that enhanced the water around for the firefighters themselves on the day, so and into the night. So, yes, we have people in London owe a great deal to the boat itself. Absolutely. And those firemen, because the important thing is that being on the fireboat itself, you became a little island. You had to be self-sufficient, because sometimes you might be out for many hours, so you had to be able to provide basic food, you had to keep yourself safe. And sometimes, there's a classic incident in St Catherine's Dock where the boat was involved, and they had to stop firefighting in order to protect the boat, because what was happening, the heat from the buildings that were alight started to blister the paintwork, and the danger was that the boat would actually catch fire itself. Although it's a steel hull, we're on teak decks here. So what they had to do was stop firefighting and cover the boat in lots of water to try and cool everything down. And then re-engage again. So it was important, because what's the point if the fireboat was going to catch fire itself? Then we'd lost the resource.
Exactly. Okay. So we're now downstairs in the actual engine room of the Massey Shaw. We actually just mentioned I'm a petrol head myself, and I can smell that lovely smell, which I'm sure would have been or will be a much stronger when these engines are actually fired up. So Dave, if you just want to talk through exactly what we've got in here, that would be great for the listeners.
Okay, so we still have the original engines from 1935, which powered the boat, and they're very unique because a lot of time was spent trying to find a company that could produce these engines, so that they could drive the fire pumps, which are connected directly to it. So the engines themselves are 8 cylinders each. They're 160 brake horsepower, which in modern day isn't a great deal, but they provide a great deal of torque. Sure. So basically, as soon as you engage these engines, the boat's going to move. Now, bearing in mind the boat weighs nearly 60 tonnes, it can pick up pretty quickly, and the top speed's about 10, 12 knots, which is quite a reasonable speed even today for a boat of this particular size. So the engines themselves would normally be into 2 modes, dependent on whether it was going to be moving the boat along, driving the prop shafts, so both one on each side, and then obviously it can be disengaged. We can run one engine to drive the boat and another engine to ride one of the fire pumps. Gotcha. The fire pumps themselves are connected behind me. Mm-hmm. We have 2 different colours so we don't get confused. Yeah. The red part of the pipe work is for the salvage that I was describing earlier on. So when we want to suck water out from another craft, that's the pipe work which we use, which is connected to a series of valves behind me.
And viewers are going to recognise that significantly because they are the pipes that we took heavy creative design inspiration from, which wrap around the antique bronze case of the watch. So you're actually seeing firsthand where we got the inspiration from here.
Sure. And then in front of that we have the green section here, which is the main fire pumps themselves. There's a series of large valves. The biggest one I have is behind me, but they're normally between 10 to 14 inch size in diameter, and they open up. We have to open all those first of all to allow water into the system. What happens is the whole boat starts to move because we're taking in something in the order of a half a tonne to 3/4 of a tonne of water immediately into this system of pipework.
Okay.
And then once we've got that, we can then decide on whether we're going to pump it out through the jet,
Sure.
or we're going to take it out through the sides with hose. So literally behind me, we have this crossover, so we can bring both engines into play with a crossover, and that goes onto the monitor, so we can operate both of those at the same time. But obviously, the important thing for anyone that comes onto the boat is if we want to pump, then it takes a few moments to get all these valves open. It's a physical demanding job. And that can be an issue, particularly when we're on the river, because if we're in formation with lots of other Dunkirk little ships or other craft and we're pumping, we can do quite a bit of damage. In the fact that when the wind changes direction, the people nearby are going to get soaked.
Yeah.
So we have to, and also going under a bridge, the modern fireboat would press a button and all the monitors stop. We can't do that because it would take too long. So we have to then bring all the monitors down as best we can, and we'll close the valves. But of course the boat is still pumping and the whole boat starts to shake. It's like, imagine putting onto the last cycle of your washing machine,
Yeah.
and as it spins round, basically what happens is our fire pumps have four impellers that spin round. So the first couple start to engage the water, and as it gets to sort of the third and fourth sort of zones as such, it starts to pick up, and that gives it the pressure.
Yeah.
So all of these pumps themselves were designed by Merryweathers from the 1920s/30s. So they were built for this boat.
Okay.
So they were totally unique design. And they work extremely well. The important thing to remember is as soon as we engage the pumps, we've got water immediately.
Sure.
There's no delay, which can catch you out, because if you happen to be on deck and you plug the hose in, as soon as these engage, the hose will inflate really quickly.
Yeah.
So you have
Keep
to
an
be,
eye on those,
you have
yeah.
to do. So normally we work in pairs, and making sure, and similarly here, we have two engineers, one per engine, listening to those controls. But as you pan round the engine room itself, you'll see there's very little you can see. It always reminds me of a mouse in a wheel going round and round, because you don't know where you're going, but you need to listen to these, to the
Sure.
telegraphs,
Okay.
and that helps us to move it forward.
Okay.
So one of the important things, obviously, is the work now going on to get the engine restored. The engines themselves are totally unique. And it's great for, particularly when we get our various visitors or people who've got any engineering background. There's not a computer in sight on this particular piece of equipment. It's all nuts and bolts. It is quite a basic engine, but obviously it's one that we need to keep going in order for the fire pumps to work. We need an engine of this size and torque to get it to happen. One of the important things, of course, with the watches that are coming about is that we have a piece of the engine that's actually provided and will be inside the watch, which is a great thing, I think, to be able to have that living part producing work, and knowing that it's got the history of being from the boat, which is what our links have produced. So for those people who have the watches, they'll be able to think about the fact that while this is still going, that's where the parts have come from, and we're very grateful for that to happen.
Which is incredibly special, guys, if you think that the original part of the engine that was actually there and played a pivotal part in World War II is actually going to be alive and well in the watch that you're going to be owning on your wrist. And it's just one of many components that makes this watch and collaboration and project so special. So we're now in the kitchen area of the Massey Shaw, and this room actually is full of history. So we'll talk to Dave. We'll go through a few of the different historical topics as well. But there's also some fantastic plaques and tributes to individuals from the boat as well. So let's run through it.
Okay, so yes, we're in the what's known as the crew space on the boat, and this is where people would come to get out of the elements. It was very basic on board the boat. We have a small galley, a small kitchen area, and a toilet at the heads, as we call it. But this would be the place where people would come to have some food, some respite away from the conditions, which so they could have a cup of tea, something warm, and that was obviously used by. Particularly for the Dunkirk trips, once again for people, the engine room, which was used as a sort of a first aid post, as was this room where they would actually help people who were suffering from hypothermia, etc., give them some food, some nourishment. And still today we've got the original tables which were built for the boat, which we actually have our food, etc., on here even today. So it's a place to meet and to get out of the elements. So we've also converted now the seating, which we're on now, into bunks, so that when we can sleep aboard, which wasn't originally designed for the boats. We go to events, people can actually stay within some reasonable comfort on board, where beforehand it was very ad hoc situation. But certainly where we are now, one of the important parts was it's played an important part with the National Health Service. Basically what happened was that in the 1947, discussions were going forward with the government at the time to bring in a National Health Service. There had been lots of problems trying to get various parties to do that, and it was decided the Fire Brigade were approached by Herbert Morrison, who'd had some involvement with the fire services in his early career, about finding a place where they could have a meeting that would be in sort of semi-secret, that people would come along and they could get away from the Westminster bubble as we know today.
Yeah.
So what they decided to do, they phoned in contact with the London Fire Brigade, spoke to the chief officer, and asked if there was a boat available, which happened to be Massey Shaw, the newest boat that they had, to go out on this particular trip, to go head off down the river from Lambeth towards Southend, and to while they were doing that with the various ministers that were needed to, and their the people that were helping them to put the final touches to the bill that was going to go forward for the formation of the health service. And in this where we are now was where the discussions took place. We have an account by at least one of the crew members at that time. They were sworn to secrecy. Once the meeting was underway, they weren't allowed to come in. The only thing they were allowed to do was to make tea, as we've done earlier on today, and to have some refreshments. But their job was basically to keep this area clear so that the discussions could go ahead. And we understand from the memoirs of the individuals who attended the meeting that it was an important factor in getting the health service over the line, so that the bill could go into Parliament, and the following year the health service in 1948 was actually underway. So the boat once again has sort of some unique territory, and we're very pleased to support the National Health Service from our original pieces here. And as you mentioned, the room itself has some of the artefacts from the Dunkirk trips itself, with the plaques, etc., which we're now having a look at. So the plaques themselves, the two big ones, the one at the top and the one underneath it, which has the names of all the crew that were participating in the Dunkirk evacuation from the LFB and from the Auxiliary Fire Service. These were presented to the boat in, I think, 1948. They were made by the workshops from the Fire Brigade to commemorate the event. And next to it we have the various plaques. The middle one, which shows Dunkirk 1940, is a plaque that was presented to all the little ships. So if you ever go onto one, you'll see that plaque that commemorates the event. And then the other plaques tell the history of the boat, and its time across in Dunkirk. So the one on the far left, which has 1965 on it, was when the little ships were formed by Raymond Baxter. He was the on-admiral at the time, and the little ships themselves went back to Dunkirk for the first time in 1965, and Massey Shaw was invited with a number of other boats to attend, which he did. And the crew, it was interesting because they were able to have the opportunity to meet with the French fire service at that time in Dunkirk. And since that time in 65, each time we've gone over to Dunkirk, we've met with the French fire service in Dunkirk, who've hosted us for a really great weekend. The other plaques tell the history of when we've been again. The one in the middle below the Dunkirk 1940 is the 1985 when we went back again 20 years later, and then the 50th anniversary, which is the one on the far end there, in 1990. And then above that we've got the two plaques, the Dunkirk 2000 we went, and the circular one on the far left is the last time we've been, which is 2015. So the boats were due to go back in 2020, but because of the pandemic, etc., they weren't able to.
So they are presented by the Mayor of Dunkirk, aren't they?
They are, yes. So the Mayor of Dunkirk and the various dignitaries normally present to each of the skippers of the boat a plaque, which signifies their attendance at the event.
Okay.
But the importance for us is obviously to remember each time we come into the room the names of the individuals that are on that plaque, who certain particular individuals will just highlight, but they had all taken part over the period and went through the Dunkirk experience. Now, I joined the society in 1983, and that time there were still several of the individuals on the board were still alive.
Wow.
And would tell their story under persuasion. Most of them basically saw it as just part of their normal
job.
role.
Yeah.
We're just going to go across to Dunkirk and rescue a few soldiers. That, but in truth, obviously, it was a lot more than that.
Yeah.
One particular individual was to be mentioned was a guy called Aubrey John May, who was the skipper of the boats himself. He did a fantastic job and has been commended by getting the Distinguished Service Medal for his work at Dunkirk, because we all understand, being on the boat for any period of time, how difficult it is to manage. But he did that with aplomb and brought the people back safely. No one was actually lost from either the crew or the soldiers. Everyone returned safely, which is something. One of the other guys that I had privilege to meet was a guy called Dick Hellier, Richard W. Hellier. He was quite an interesting character. He was a station officer in the London Fire Brigade, who basically had some quite good seaman skills. He'd been as part of his role, and was selected because he was also a good swimmer, which was very fortuitous, because he received the BEM, and in his citation it talks about him actually swimming ashore with a floating rope and putting a stake in the ground to enable the soldiers to pull themselves onto the boat. Because one of the problems that they had is that the rowing boat that they took with them was used. The idea was that the soldiers would go in the boat and then row themselves to Massey if they could, and then be unloaded. But everyone got on the boat and it sunk it. So they were struggling to get these soldiers aboard. He volunteered to actually swim ashore with this line, a grass line that was floating, and put a stake in the ground and allow them to pull themselves onto the boat, which was a great assistance.
Great idea. Yeah.
He was the engineer in the boat, and when you spoke to him, he said, well, there was nothing, untoward. We heard, involved with bringing these soldiers across. He said, I was in the engine room most of the time, so I didn't see a lot. I said, so if you didn't see a lot, did you hear things? Oh, he said, yeah, we heard a few explosions going off, and we heard the bullets whizzing over our heads sometimes. So he said, that's why I didn't like to put my head above the and open the engine hatch in case I got shot. So you were under fire then? Oh, yeah, we're under fire. So nothing happened other than that. Oh, he said, yeah, fortunately the boat didn't get hit, but we did have a few problems. One of them, I know that one of the engines stalled when they were pulling away with troops, and it put them into quite a dangerous situation. But he and his colleague managed to get the boat back again. But no, it was all very nonplus. But obviously I knew there's a lot more to it. And normally after a drop of his favourite rum, he would tell the proper story,
sure.
which was, for a man, you know, in his 20s, it was quite frightening. But he blocked a lot of it out. He'd only give you the sort of edited version. But it was a fantastic thing to do. And when he came, one of the things we were pleased in 1990 for the 50th anniversary of the Dunkirk, we found a soldier who was rescued by Dick that came up, a guy called John Overy. His group of soldiers had been on the beaches waiting to be rescued for 3 days, and Massey arrived and managed to get them off. But he remembers the boat itself, and it's the first time in 50 years that he'd actually recounted his story to his family.
Wow.
When they met in 1990.
We've got a photograph of that here. I pointed out to you.
Yeah.
So you've got a photograph of
So it was a fantastic thing. What we didn't know, unfortunately for John, was that within about 6 months of that meeting, and the two of them had corresponded, that John unfortunately had found he'd got cancer, and he died shortly afterwards. But at least the two of them did manage to go, and John recalls the story of how he was pulled onto the boat by Dick and his colleagues, and safely managed to get back to the UK. And he continued his wartime. He ended up in Sicily, in Italy, right the way through the whole of the war. But being saved at Dunkirk was the start of his journey. So it's quite an epic story.
What a hero, and
fantastic.
everyone up in this room and everyone who's been on this boat, the instrumental roles they played is like, it's quite breathtaking, isn't it, really? And for them to think that it was just a normal thing to do and part of the job, it's very, very heroic. And these images and this flag here as well, Dave, this is Massey Shaw.
Yeah. So what we have here, we've got some pictures of the person that the boat's named after. So starting on the right-hand side is an early portrait of Massey Shaw when he first came to the London Fire Brigade. So he'd been in his early 30s then, and then progressing across from the right to the left, you'll see, obviously, as he got older, in his 30 years, it certainly aged him, because one of the things that people forgot was the fact that he and other officers were actively involved in supporting their crews. So Massey Shaw suffered a number of injuries to his legs, and in fact later on in life he had both of his legs amputated.
Wow.
So through injuries that he'd sustained while he was actually in charge. But certainly as a very well-known Victorian person, he would the classic to look at was the fact that obviously the Victorians loved going to the theatre, and he got to know Gilbert and Sullivan, who obviously provide the operettas. And in one of their first productions, the operetta Iolanthe, there's a scene in the beginning of Iolanthe where the fairy godmother sings to the audience, and Gilbert and Sullivan knew that Massey Shaw was going to be there on the first night. Okay. So they changed the words. So in the opening sort of stanza, the fairy godmother actually sings, "Oh Captain Shaw, with your deluge of water, could you put out the fires in my heart?" Wow. Or very similar. So that became, obviously he was very embarrassed by that, because he was not the sort of person that's like publicity, but
very humble.
But certainly for the opera fans, if they look at Iolanthe, you'll see the dedication to Massey Shaw on that first night, and that stuck with him quite a lot. So every time it was produced, they knew that it was the fire chief they were singing to.
Wow, what a story.
It is, yeah. I mean, that's...
The other stories, he enabled the Prince of Wales to go to fires, didn't he?
He did, yes. There was a link up with the Victoria's eldest son, obviously became the king. That Massey Shaw found out that the prince was obviously interested in firefighting, so he provided him with fire kit, and he would go along with Massey Shaw. They'd send a carriage to pick him up when he was at Kensington Palace or wherever he was, and he and a few of his buddies would go out and go firefighting with him. So Massey Shaw had to rein him back on a few occasions. He was quite an enthusiastic person. Okay. And he was that's where they had the link with obviously the Queen. She wasn't very happy that her eldest son was putting his life at
Sure,
risk,
yeah.
because on one particular occasion a wall collapsed and he was very close to getting killed. So that was a bit too much,
Too close.
for the heir of the throne.
Okay.
But certainly it didn't help. You know, it helped for people to know that he had those links with
Of course.
the Queen,
Yeah.
and the power that came with it. And he used that on occasions to assist with getting new fire regulations through, so that people knew who
It
they were
helps
dealing with. Yeah,
To be able to be so close to the royal family.
very much so. So the guy, I say that we think that the boat's history and the person, Massey Shaw, they have a link together about how they went through their particular lives, and that's the thing that drives us to keep the boat going, really.
Of course. And this flag here, I believe it represents anybody who has a little ship that sails the channel. This is a flag that they would be given to fly on the boat. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So if you basically got the cross of St George, and it's defaced here in the middle by the coat of arms of Dunkirk, and so it's quite a unique flag that only the little ships can actually use that, and it's something that they were given as an honour to fly. So if you ever see that on the river or any other boat, you'll see that flag being proudly displayed. It is totally unique, and for all those little ships now, it's a badge of honour to have that and to be flying it.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we'll venture on upstairs to the next part of the tour.
Okay.
Okay, so that concludes the tour on the beautiful Massey Shaw boat. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Dave, thank you so much for filling us in on all of this beautiful, rich history that the boat has to offer. I'm sure you can see just how special this watch is that we're going to be creating, and the fact that you're actually going to become a real part of World War II history. So in conclusion, Dave, anything else you want to say to our listeners?
Well, the important thing is to know that it's a living thing, the boat, and the important part of what we're doing from the sale of the watches is to regenerate the boat, to get it back into action again, but also to know that you can come along and support the boat either physically by coming along to our open days and various events which are available on our website www.masseyshaw.org. You'll be able to find out how to come and see us and to get involved. We also obviously would like you to have your physical support, but monetary support also would be very helpful. As you can see, to run a boat like this is an inexpensive thing to do, but we are very keen that people can actually actively engage and come along to enjoy the experience. So you'll be very welcome to come on board at any time, but please have a look at our website and you'll see all the contact details, etc., available for trips, etc., on the boat.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Dave. Really appreciate it. And make sure you get your Massey Shaw watch and support this fantastic floating piece of history, because we have to keep her alive. So thanks so much, and have a great day.